He was a man with no home, no future, and no reason to live until one scream in the desert changed everything. What begins as a rescue becomes a sacred journey of love, honor, and redemption. But when the ghosts of his past come to kill, will the man he's become be strong enough to protect the family he never expected to find? Stay with us. This is the story of Caleb Morgan, and it might just change how you see your own. The sun was bleeding into the edges of the sky, casting a fiery glow over the red cliffs of Utah's Red Rock Pass, when the silence shattered. A woman screamed. It wasn't the sound of surprise or pain, it was something far deeper, something primal. It was the kind of sound that stops your heart cold, the kind that makes even the wind hesitate. And on that evening in 1879, Caleb Morgan heard it like a bell tolling for lost souls. He had been riding for hours alone, the creak of his saddle and the soft clop of his mare Sage the only signs of life around him. The canyon's stillness felt ancient, like it had witnessed too many stories now buried in the sand. Caleb, once a soldier in the Union Army, and now just a shadow of the man he had been, wasn't seeking redemption or hope. He was just trying to outrun memory 1 mile at a time. Caleb was a man who had seen too much. Death on battlefields, betrayal behind flags, and the slow crushing erosion of trust after peace had left him with nothing. The war had taken his brothers. Reconstruction took his land. And time had taken everything else. Now he had a rifle, a tired horse, and a silence so deep it echoed inside him. So when that scream ripped through the canyon, it was like something reached down into his chest and yanked him back to life. Caleb didn't hesitate. He kicked Sage into motion, the mare responding with a sudden burst of energy. The scream came again, sharp and desperate, bouncing off the walls of the Devil's Fingers, a jagged cluster of rocks known by locals for hiding bandits and worse. What he saw when he reached the source of the cry would stay with him forever. 2 white men, filthy and hard-eyed, had cornered a young native woman against the rocks. Her face was streaked with blood and dirt, her clothes torn. In her trembling hands, she clutched a knife, but it was clear she wouldn't last another minute. "Leave her be!" Caleb's voice thundered across the stones. He dismounted mid-motion, boots hitting the sand rifle raised. One of the men turned, sneering. "This ain't your fight, old man." But Caleb didn't answer with words. His rifle cracked once. The taller man jerked backward, crumpling without a sound. The second reached for a pistol at his belt, but Caleb's second shot was already cutting through the air. And then silence. Heavy. Final. The woman didn't move. She stood still, her chest rising and falling fast. Her dark eyes were wide and unblinking. Caleb lowered his weapon and approached slowly, his voice low and calm. "You're safe now. I won't hurt you." She said nothing. He handed her his canteen, the gesture as old as trust itself. After a moment's hesitation, she took it. Caleb noticed a deep gash on her arm. Without a word, he pulled off his coat and draped it over her shoulders. She clutched it tightly. Then slowly, he knelt and began cleaning her wound with water and a torn strip from his shirt. She winced, but didn't pull away. Night fell quietly around them. Caleb built a small fire in a protected hollow and gave her food, jerky, hard biscuits. She ate in small, cautious bites, watching him the entire time. There was something in her gaze that reminded Caleb of the last time he'd looked his brother in the eyes before a firefight. Not fear, not even gratitude. Something older. Something that knew too much. For hours, she didn't speak. The firelight danced across the red canyon walls, casting shadows like spirits of the past. Caleb didn't press her. He simply kept the fire going, his eyes scanning the darkness, his mind quiet for the first time in years. Then, just as the stars burned bright overhead, she spoke one word. Ayasha. Her voice was soft, almost a whisper, like the breeze rustling through dry leaves. Ayasha, Caleb repeated, nodding. That's a beautiful name. She didn't smile, but she did look away from the fire for the first time toward the sky. Her features softened. Something about the way she said her name, it sounded like it carried stories generations, maybe even a promise. Caleb didn't ask more questions. He didn't tell her his story either. Maybe she already knew it. Maybe she'd seen it in the way he carried his rifle, or the way he never sat with his back exposed. Later that night, after Ayasha had curled up near the fire in his coat, Caleb sat with his back against a rock, staring at the stars. He hadn't slept well in years, and tonight would be no different. But something had shifted. Something inside him had stirred. This wasn't just another stop on his wandering path. This woman, this moment, it had the feel of destiny about it. Not the loud kind that comes with trumpets and fire, but the quiet kind. The kind that walks beside you for a while, then asks you to change. He looked over at Ayasha, her face calm in sleep despite all she had endured. He thought of her courage standing her ground with only a knife. And something about that made him sit a little straighter. Caleb Morgan didn't believe in signs. Not anymore. But the desert had a way of whispering truths to men who had nothing left. And tonight it whispered something different. It whispered stay. And for the first time in a long time, Caleb didn't argue with the voice in the wind. He just listened and waited for the dawn. The morning came as a hush, not a trumpet. Light spilled slowly over the horizon, turning the crimson cliffs soft gold, like God himself was painting with gentler strokes today. Caleb awoke, stiff-sore, and still listening for what he didn't yet know. Ayasha was already awake, sitting cross-legged near the dying fire, her dark eyes fixed on the distance like she saw something he couldn't. She spoke quietly, her voice hoarse from silence. My people are east, near the great cliffs. 2 days' ride. Her words hung in the morning air like prayer smoke. Caleb didn't ask why she was out here alone or what had happened before he'd found her. It didn't matter. He nodded once. Then we ride. They traveled in silence most of that day, letting the rhythm of hoofbeats do the talking. The land changed as they moved steeper canyons, wild sage thick along the trail, and hawks wheeling overhead like silent watchers. Every now and then, Caleb glanced over at Ayasha. She didn't flinch from the heat or the dust. She rode as if born to it. When night came again, they camped beneath a bluff. Caleb gathered wood, while Ayesha cleared a space her movements efficient practiced. There was something reverent about the way she stacked the stones for a fire ring, like each rock meant something. After supper, she surprised him by speaking. Do you always ride alone? Caleb stared into the fire. For a long time now. Why? He took a deep breath, slow and thoughtful. Because the men I rode with didn't come back. And the ones who did weren't the same. Neither was I. Ayasha nodded slowly, understanding without pressing. We carry more ghosts than we realize, she said. That night she sang, a song with no words, only sound. It rose and fell like the wind in canyon walls. Caleb closed his eyes, and for the first time in years, he wasn't dreaming of bullets and blood, but of water running over stone. The next day, the trail grew steeper. The path cut along cliffs and dropped into deep ravines. At one point, Sage lost her footing and Caleb had to dismount, leading her by the reins. Ayesha offered him her hand when he slipped. He took it, and for a moment, neither of them let go. They reached a wide, dry riverbed by late afternoon. There, Ayesha knelt and pressed her palms to the earth. Caleb watched curious. She whispered something in her language, then rose. This place is sacred, she said. It remembers. Remembers what everything? They made camp under the old cottonwoods. Ayasha drew symbols in the dirt, teaching Caleb their meanings: life journey, protection. He listened like a child at his grandfather's knee. In the quiet hours he told her more. About his brothers. About how he couldn't go home again. About the land he'd lost, and how he'd stopped looking for anything permanent. She didn't offer pity, just presence. As the stars brightened above, Caleb found himself watching her instead of the sky. There was a stillness in her that calmed the restlessness inside him. She wasn't trying to fix him, only to walk beside him, and somehow that made the road feel lighter. Ayasha shared a story, then a memory of her mother teaching her the names of desert flowers. Even the smallest bloom, she said, holds healing. Caleb had never been taught such things. His world had always been about survival, strategy, suspicion. But here, among cottonwoods and ancient echoes, he learned to be still, to listen, and slowly to hope. They rose early the next day and continued east. The sun was strong, the trail dusty, but the rhythm of their travel brought comfort. They passed through groves of juniper over ridges that looked down upon sweeping valleys. Ayasha pointed out signs: an eagle feather, a circle of stones, a single cactus blooming in red. To her, everything had meaning. Caleb had never known the world could speak in such quiet ways. By late afternoon, a storm rolled in from the north. Thunder echoed off canyon walls. They found shelter in a shallow cave just before the rain came. It fell in heavy sheets, drumming against the rock like 1,000 heartbeats. Caleb built a fire, and they sat together listening to the world cleanse itself. As the rain faded into a soft patter, Ayasha leaned her head on his shoulder. She said nothing, but he felt the weight of that moment like a promise. When the sky cleared and stars returned, they stepped out from the cave. In the distance, the sandstone cliffs of Zion rose like giants from the earth washed clean by the storm. Caleb took a deep breath. "We're close, aren't we?" Ayasha nodded. "Tomorrow we reach the edge of my people's land." He didn't want the journey to end, but he knew now it wasn't just a journey across land. It was a journey into something deeper, and somehow the man who had set out with nothing was arriving with something he hadn't known he needed. He looked at Ayasha. She looked back, and in her silence he heard it again. "Welcome home." They saw the smoke first. Not the thin gray of morning cook fires, but the thick white plumes of signal fires' warnings etched into the sky. As Caleb and Ayasha rode into the canyon's mouth, the earth beneath their horses' hooves seemed to pulse with tension. Each step forward was a beat in a drumline they could not yet hear, but which they both felt down to their bones. Zion loomed ahead, but home was still uncertain. When they reached the valley floor, a sudden hush fell over the world. Then, from the edges of the trees they came, warriors, faces marked with war, paint, bows drawn, spears pointed. Caleb stopped Sage with a gentle pull. He raised both hands slowly, though his instincts screamed otherwise. Ayasha dismounted and walked ahead. She spoke quickly in her native tongue, her words soft but commanding. Caleb watched her, a figure of grace and strength, facing men who moments earlier would have loosed arrows at the sight of him. The warriors didn't lower their weapons. Not yet. Then a man emerged taller than the rest, wrapped in a mantle of feathers and bone. His presence was like gravity. Caleb knew without being told this was Oran Ayasha's father and the spiritual leader of her people. Oran listened without interruption, his eyes dark as obsidian and just as hard flicked to Caleb only once. That look was enough to lay bare every sin Caleb had tried to bury. He felt like a boy again, standing before his own father's disappointed silence. Ayasha stepped aside. Oran took a step forward, his voice measured. "You saved her." Caleb nodded. "I did. You harmed her not. I would rather die." The elder studied him, And why would a white man risk death for one not his own? Caleb didn't know how to answer. Not really. So he said the only truth that felt solid, because it was right. Oren said nothing for a long moment. Then he lifted his hand and the weapons dropped. Just like that. But the tension remained a different kind now. A trial was beginning. That night the fires were lit. Not just for warmth, but for ritual. Ayasha stayed by her father's side, her gaze a mixture of pride and worry. Caleb sat alone near the edge of the circle, feeling the eyes of the village burn hotter than any flame. He was the outsider, and the outsider always stood trial. He was summoned to the fire's center where Oren stood waiting. The old man carried a staff adorned with feathers and bones, its top crowned with a single eagle talon. Oren painted lines across Caleb's forehead and chest, with a mixture that smelled of ash and herbs. "You walked the path of blood and mercy," the elder intoned. "Now you will walk the path of memory and fire." Without warning, Oren took Caleb's hand and pressed it to a hot stone from the fire's edge. Pain shot through him, searing, but strangely clarifying. The crowd around the fire began to chant, low and rhythmic, like the pulse of the earth itself. Oren continued, "You carry shadows, many, but one who saves the soul of a woman may be saved in turn, if the spirits accept you." Then Ayasha came forward. She held a simple bundle, her mother's medicine pouch. She placed it in Caleb's hands, then whispered, "This is our gift and our test. Keep it close." The night passed in silence afterward. Caleb lay on a woven mat not quite inside the circle, but no longer outside it either. Sleep came in fits filled with smoke, and the distant cries of men long dead. But in the haze of those dreams he felt something break like an old wall, giving way to a flood. At dawn, Oren called him again, this time not alone. The whole village gathered, elders, children, warriors. They stood in a circle around Caleb and Ayasha. The elder lifted a single feather dipped in red ochre. "You have been chosen," he said, "not by man, not even by woman, but by what binds them. You are her sacred companion, not by law of man, but by law of the ancestors." Caleb stared at the feather in Oren's outstretched hand. He didn't reach for it. "I didn't come for that," he said softly. "I don't deserve it." "You did not come for glory," Oren said. "That is why you are worthy." Ayasha stepped beside her father. Her voice for once was strong and clear. "In our way, the one who saves a woman's soul becomes her mirror, her fire, her other half. You didn't just protect my body. You gave my spirit a place to breathe." Caleb's throat tightened. He hadn't cried in years, but the edges of his eyes burned now. He took the feather, and the village exhaled as one. That night, the drums played not for battle, but for belonging. Children danced. Women brought Caleb bowls of stew laced with herbs. The men offered nods not of acceptance, but of acknowledgement. It was enough. Ayasha sat beside him by the fire, her shoulder brushing his. Neither of them spoke, but the silence was no longer empty. It was full of memory of promise and of a bond older than words. The trial was over, and something sacred had begun. It started with the hawks. They circled above the canyon early that morning, shrieking in a way that made every elder glance skyward. Caleb noticed them first. He was by the corral showing a village boy how to braid a length of rawhide into a rope, when the child stopped, stared at the sky, and whispered bad spirits. Then he ran. The omen felt too real to ignore. By midday, a strange dust began to rise from the western trail. It was too thick for wind, too fast for herds. Hoofbeats followed, steady, familiar. Caleb's stomach sank before he saw the riders. Cain Blackwell. The man was a shadow pulled from Caleb's past riding at the head of 5 bounty hunters, each one carrying the kind of cold in their eyes that had nothing to do with justice. Cain had a way of making a man feel like he was already dying. He didn't kill for law or bounty. He killed for the balance of the ledger in his head. Caleb had crossed him once years back in Texas when Cain's employer tried to hang an innocent black family for trespassing. Caleb stood in the way, shot the land baron's son in broad daylight. Cain never forgot, and now he had come to collect. The village responded quickly. Drums thundered like warning bells. Warriors took their posts among the trees. Mothers drew children to shelter. Caleb watched from the center of the village, his body frozen in a moment he'd long feared but never prepared for. Ayasha stood beside him. She didn't speak, just looked into his eyes. There was no fear there, only fire. Cain's voice cracked the silence like a whip. "Caleb Morgan, you're marked. Time to pay up." Caleb stepped forward slowly with the weight of 100 memories on his shoulders. He didn't draw his gun. He didn't need to. The red feather tied to his chest said more than bullets ever could. "I took a life," he said, loud enough for the village to hear. "But it was to save others. If that makes me guilty, so be it." Cain sneered. "You don't get to decide. You left blood on Texas soil, and I'm here to settle it." Before Caleb could answer, Ayasha moved to his side. She looked Cain dead in the eye. "He's not yours to take. He is one of us." Cain laughed. "You think that matters?" Oren stepped out of the shadows. His presence stopped even the horses. "It matters to the land," he said, his voice calm as thunder. "And the land will remember." The bounty hunters dismounted, weapons drawn. It would be 6 against many. But Cain wasn't counting numbers. He was counting fear. He didn't know this land, and he didn't understand its people. Caleb turned to Oren. "This is my past. Let me walk out. Spare them." "No," Ayasha said, placing her hand on his chest. "You no longer walk alone." As if summoned by her words, the wind changed. It rose in spirals, lifting dust into the air. The drums began again, slow, steady old as time. A chant followed. The villagers began to hum low and rhythmic, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself. Cain's men shifted nervously. One muttered, "What the hell is this?" And then Caleb moved. Fast. He knocked Cain's revolver free and ducked behind a post. That was the signal. Arrows flew from every direction. Warriors moved like smoke. 2 bounty hunters fell before they could fire. The rest scrambled. Gunshots rang out. Caleb tackled a man near the well, wrestled away his rifle, and fired into the trees to cover a group of children. He fought not for survival, but for something more. He fought for her. Cain managed to take cover shouting orders, but the village was alive, moving, breathing, fighting as one. These people weren't defending a man. They were defending a soul they had chosen to protect. It didn't take long. 4 bounty hunters died under the trees. The 5th ran screaming. Cain mounted his black stallion and fled into the desert's edge, his shadow broken. Silence returned slowly, not fearful, not mourning, but reverent. Ayasha walked to Caleb, dust and blood streaking her dress. Her hands found his arm. Her eyes never looked away. "You didn't run." "Not this time," he said the words, catching in his throat. Oren came forward, placing a weathered hand on Caleb's shoulder. "Now you are truly hers." That night, the fire in the center of the village was different. It wasn't for ceremony or warning. It was for healing. The songs sung were not war chants but lullabies. Children curled near their mothers. Warriors cleaned their arrows. And Caleb, he sat in a circle once close to him. An old woman brought him a bowl of stew. Another laid a fresh blanket over his shoulders. A boy handed him a carved pendant. Teahana, they called him, the chosen flame. He looked up at Ayasha, seated beside him beneath the stars. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand brushed his, and that was enough. He had killed, yes. But not for revenge. Not this time. He had fought for something sacred, for home, for redemption. And as the firelight danced in her eyes, Caleb Morgan understood the truth he had run from for years. The past might follow a man, but so can love, and in the end only one of them stays. The river ran slow that evening, gliding through the rocks, as if it had all the time in the world. Its voice was soft a whisper over worn stones, and for the first time in a long while, Caleb Morgan found himself listening. He and Ayasha sat beneath a cottonwood tree, their shadows long in the golden light the past days, etched into every silence between them. The battle was over. The dust had settled, and yet Caleb's hands still trembled when they were still too long. He rubbed his thumb across the carved pendant the boy had given him, a symbol of fire and endurance. He didn't know what he had expected after the fight, but peace wasn't it. Peace had always felt like a dream others got to live. Until now. Ayasha said nothing. She didn't need to. Her presence was solid and warm beside him. Her silence was never empty. It was full of things she trusted him enough to feel without words. He turned to her, finally breaking the stillness. What happens now? She looked out across the water before answering. We live. 2 simple words. Yet they landed like thunder in his chest. For a man who had been running so long he forgot what it meant to stay. Those words were a promise too big to hold. In the days that followed, Caleb didn't leave. He didn't talk of departure. He simply remained. The village didn't treat him like a guest anymore. He was given tasks, shared meals, welcomed into circles where once he was only watched. Children played near him without fear. Elders nodded as he passed. Warriors greeted him with silent respect. He helped repair a section of the irrigation ditch damaged during the skirmish. It was hard, honest work under the sun. But when water flowed again and the children cheered, he felt something shift in him. Pride. Not for what he'd done in battle, but for what he was building now. Ayesha was always near. She showed him plants with healing properties, taught him which stones held warmth through cold nights. One morning, she took his hand and led him to a sacred spring deeper in the canyon. This is where my mother came to speak with the spirits, she told him. They sat there for hours saying nothing. The wind rustled the trees like voices long forgotten. When they left, she handed him a small flower wrapped in cloth. It blooms once every 5 years, she said. It means renewal. Caleb kept it in his coat pocket. One evening, as they watched the moon rise over the cliffs, he asked her, "Do you believe we're meant for certain places?" She thought a moment. "I believe the earth remembers footsteps. Some places call you back. Others won't let you leave until you've learned what they came to teach." He didn't reply. He didn't need to. There was a slow trust growing between them, not born from the fire of passion, but from something gentler, sturdier. They moved together like 2 rivers that had finally found a shared bed to run through. He didn't hold her hand often, but when he did, it felt like holding a promise older than either of them. One morning, Oren summoned Caleb. They sat beneath the same tree where he'd first been named Teahana. The elders studied him, then asked, "Do you still feel like a man without a home?" Caleb didn't answer right away. He looked at his hands, calloused and worn, but no longer shaking. "No," he said quietly. "I think I finally understand what home feels like." Oren nodded. "Good, then you're ready." Ready for what? To carry the fire forward? He didn't explain, but Caleb understood. Some things weren't taught in words. That night, by the same river, Ayesha laid her head against Caleb's shoulder. They listened to the water, to the hum of the night insects, to the steady thrum of life continuing. He asked her then, "What do we call this?" She smiled, eyes closed. "We don't need to call it anything. The river already knows." He stayed long after that night. Days turned into weeks. He learned more how to read the sky for storms, how to mimic the cry of an owl, how to sit in stillness until a deer approached close enough to touch. He told stories to children by the fire, stories he once thought were too heavy to speak. And Ayesha, she never asked him to be someone he wasn't. She only helped him remember the man he'd forgotten he could be. One day, a trader passed through with news from far-off towns. Caleb sat quietly as he listened. Nothing from the outside world called to him anymore. There was no longer a past chasing him down, no bounty, no shadow waiting at the door. Just the present filled with moments worth staying awake for. As summer turned toward fall, Caleb stood once more by the river. The water ran slower now, but still it moved. He took the flower Ayesha had given him and placed it on a flat stone at the water's edge. For what's past, he whispered, and what remains. Then he turned back toward the village where laughter echoed and firelight flickered in the wind. He walked not as a ghost, but as a man returned. Home wasn't a place. It was her voice in the dark, the fire in his hands, and the river that knew his name. Caleb Morgan's story was never meant to be easy. It was meant to be true. From the first beat of hooves across the dust of Red Rock Pass to the final quiet moment by the river that remembered his name. Caleb's life mirrored the story of so many forgotten men, those who lose themselves not through malice, but through time, grief, and regret. And yet through each chapter of his journey, what was once broken began to stitch itself back together with thread spun from courage, compassion, and the most unexpected kind of love. He started as a wanderer, a drifter, swallowed by silence, haunted by war, and chased by the ghosts of men he once knew. He had no home, no plan, no destination. But in one searing instant, a cry for help in a canyon alive with memory, he found purpose. Caleb didn't know Ayesha didn't owe her anything, yet he risked everything for her. That choice, born not of obligation but of instinct, became the first spark that reignited his soul. As he traveled with Ayesha through the harsh wilderness, Caleb didn't just cross land, he crossed into new understanding. He learned to listen not with his ears but with his heart. He learned that silence wasn't something to fear, but something to fill with meaning. In the soft tread of Ayesha's steps and the quiet steadiness of her presence, Caleb found companionship without condition and healing without demand. Arriving at her village, he faced the weight of ancient traditions and the gaze of a people who saw him first as a threat. But they also saw what he did for her. And in the wisdom of her father, Oren, and the rituals of fire and memory, Caleb faced the most sacred trial not of strength or survival, but of acceptance. Through it, he was given a name. Not Caleb the soldier or Caleb the hunted, but Tehana, the chosen flame. A man shaped not by what he took, but by what he gave. His greatest test came not in silence but in violence when his past returned in the form of bounty hunters led by Cain Blackwell. Caleb could have run. He could have surrendered. Instead, he stood. For Ayesha. For the people who now called him kin. For the man he wanted to be. And in doing so, he did more than defeat his past, he rewrote it. But the true transformation didn't come in battle. It came in the days after, in the slow sacred rhythms of life that followed. He stayed, he worked, he listened, he learned. He found meaning not in the heat of a gunfight, but in the way a child laughed when he told a story, in the way Ayesha's hand lingered against his, in the sound of a river whispering secrets only the heart could understand. Caleb Morgan didn't conquer the West. He didn't become a legend sung around fires. But he did something rarer. He found home not in a place but in people, in truth, in peace. And through that home he became whole again. The lesson we can take. What do we learn from Caleb's story? That no one is ever too far gone. That even when the world tries to convince you you're nothing but a shadow, there is a path hidden, perhaps quiet and winding, but still waiting to be walked. Sometimes it begins with a choice: to help, to stay, to listen. In our modern world, we're often driven by speed, ambition, and noise. We measure success by things we can touch and own. But stories like Caleb's remind us of a deeper truth: that connection, belonging, and redemption aren't found in power, but in presence, in the willingness to start over, in the bravery it takes to sit beside someone and simply say, "I'm here." Perhaps the real message is this: you don't have to be a hero to be sacred in someone's story. Sometimes being there truly, there is enough to change everything. So, to all who've ever felt lost, who've ever questioned if they can come back from the things they've done or the pain they carry, Caleb's story answers with a gentle resounding, yes. There is always a road home, even if it leads through wild land and stormy skies. The journey may be long, but the river remembers, and the fire waits to be carried forward. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of the quiet strength we each carry, then please support us by subscribing to our channel. Your support gives us the inspiration to keep bringing stories like this to life. Stories of honor, redemption, and the enduring human spirit. Because somewhere out there, another soul is waiting to be reminded that it's never too late to begin again. Subscribe now and let the next story find its way to you.